Hey Josh, thanks for joining us.
Hey Rich, thanks. Good to be here.
Long time coming. All entirely my fault, but I've been trying to get you on this for ages, and then various things popped up, but I'm glad to have you here finally.
No, all good. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I think we tried to reschedule this at least, I don't know, half a dozen times. Probably not that many.
So, and to be fair, the last one was, so our strategy director, we were heading over to Ireland for his wedding, and I totally forgotten that I was actually going to be at his wedding when I was supposed to be doing this. So I was like, I can't do that one from the wedding. Anyway, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's 6 Sessions. I'm actually fresh off the plane from Collision conference out in Toronto, so hopefully the jet lag doesn't make me stumble through this intro too badly. Today, we're going to talk about that wild journey that is startup life. Tech startups are a different beast. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of internal and external expectation. There's market fit, competition, team growth, go-to-market plans. It is not an easy ride. Today's guest is a tech startups guy. Code guy turned serial founder. From Ubernote to Referral Rock to software consultancy, he knows a thing or two about growing tech businesses. And he's happy to share the things he's learned along the way. Co-host of the Finding SaaS podcast and regular sharer of warts and all type of content on Twitter. Today's chat is going to be full of insight. We're going to talk about the whys, whens, and wherefores in tech startups. And we're going to talk about why the people are so important. These chats are designed to be short and sweet, but hopefully full of insight. And as a reminder, it's definitely unfiltered, which is the bit that makes it fun for me. This week, I'm excited to introduce you to a startup rock star who is Josh Ho, founder of Referral Rock. Josh, welcome.
Oh, thanks.
Do you know what? I genuinely thought I was going to stumble through that a lot more than that. I tried to read through the intro as I was waiting. I was like, you sound like you're hungover, but I guarantee I'm not. Just jet lag.
That's great. Maybe you had some coffee. I don't know.
A lot of coffee. I'm good. You watch. I start to bounce as I go through the questions. Anyway, so first off, how's 2022 panning out for you?
Actually, if you don't mind, I might make a small correction to your intro. It's Searching for SaaS. It was the name of the podcast. So you had Finding. You had the sentiment correct. Maybe we should go by that domain.
So yeah, and actually, do you know what? So I listen to, before I do these intros and like before I kind of pull together questions, I go research, and it was actually the first time I'd come across the podcast. So like I've followed you on Twitter, like I'm really into the way that you kind of talk about like the journey that you're going through and your opinions on startup SaaS life, that kind of stuff. And it was the first time I'd come across the podcast. So actually on the 7-hour flight back from Toronto, I kind of smashed through a bunch of episodes. So it's really good podcast. Actually, it's really nice insight. I like the balance between you. Is it
Nate?
I've forgotten the other Nate. I really like the balance between the different journeys. Yeah. So anybody who is listening, you should go check it out. Searching for SaaS, not finding SaaS.
It's just a testament to how even though both of us are marketing people, like I don't really market it enough very much. It's kind of one of those things that's just fun to kind of do with a friend and see how it goes. But I'm glad you get a lot out of it. So
well, that's the premise of this, right? So I started these because basically because I thought that'd be an entertaining thing for me to do on a Friday. And I'd like it's generally designed to just feel like two mates having a chat and just talking through growth stuff. So yeah, like I get it. It's and it's I prefer listening to stuff like that when it's less stage, more kind of like here is my
fly on the wall conversation. I like the phrase when I've heard other podcasters talk about it and other shows like this. It's just like letting the audience be privy to a conversation that they might not otherwise be in, and just like kind of fun to listen to and feel like you're part of it. So.
Well, I guess it's the podcast equivalent of photography reportage, like those candid photos.
Right. Those like derpy oops, like or whatever, or just catching the moment. Yeah, definitely.
So how's 2022 been for you so far?
I'll be honest, it's been rough. A little rough considering from I guess from a personal level and from a professional level with business, but we don't have to go too much into personal, but I mean, that one's fine. But I think everyone coming out of, pandemic, all these other changes is just, massively disruptive. Like I have 2 kids that are in grade school age. So not as bad as other people have had it, with childcare issues and things like that. But all this change, I think everyone is just sick of change. Like I'm always one of these, hey, I welcome change, but now it's just like, okay, I'm on that latter end of, okay, yeah, other people that were complaining about it for a while, now I'm starting to burn on it. So yeah, it's been rough, and you could feel free to stick your thumb on any of those topics.
So yeah, and it's so like yeah, I will, but I can sympathize with it. So like when we went into the first lockdown in the UK, there was almost like an unknown excitement to it. So it was like an adrenaline rush, like how are we going to keep the business afloat? Like what is our new strategy? And there was like a million things that had to be done very quickly. And then it very quickly got into, okay, we've done that. The business is in a good growing position again. Like this is okay. Became business as usual. And it started to like the energy sapped. And then there was another lockdown and more changes. So it's been like a roller coaster of emotions. And I think I've felt it over the last 12 months. There's moments where I just don't feel like I've got anything left in the tank. It gets heavy. So but digging into that then. So actually I'll ask that question in a minute because I want people to understand what Referral Rock is, and maybe we'll talk through the journal and then we can come back to that. So for those who don't know, what is Referral Rock?
So we are SaaS, so software as a service in the MarTech space. I'm assuming you mostly have marketing types of people listening to this, but hey, who knows? We have fans all over the different places. So we do have our own little, we're in a spot of the Brinkers MarTech. I don't know, what is it, 50,000 now? But I think even
I'm
when
sure it goes up by 10x every year.
I think our first foray might have been around the time when it was like the MarTech 5,000 or even somewhere around then. So we're in this little segment of, I think you might have labeled us in the loyalty/referral area, but with any of these topics, once you get into those areas, there's obviously so much nuance. You're like, we're not like them at all, but hey, it's fine. But leaning into that, we help businesses run and scale word of mouth types of programs. So whether it's a referral program, brand ambassador, affiliate marketing, partner programs, essentially, our main one is our customer referrals. But as companies get into this and they get to tie all their nice systems in to track attribution and all that fun stuff, they start to see like, okay, this really isn't that different across these different programs. The difference in programs are really more about who the audience is, who are the people doing the sharing. So we build a platform for that and help businesses run those.
And who do you sell to? Like, who's your target market?
We're a horizontal play. It's a hard question to answer for me most of the times because we'll run the gambit of we've run programs for H&R Block, which is a massive national tax firm in the United States. But we've also run it for a small yoga studio down the street, and we'll also have Matterport, other tech companies, all kinds of stuff. So the niche is really more about any businesses that have a solid brand, a good amount of, honestly, customers that are doing a lot of referring already. They're already getting some word of mouth. So that's sort of the people that best fit for us, because we can take that initial positive outlook from a brand perspective and people that are willing to talk about your company, for agencies and whatever. It makes more sense when there's more numbers, honestly, unless it's a partner program where you're running it with 10 exclusive partners and you want to help track those referrals through there, if that makes sense.
And what stage would you, as a business, what stage would you say Referral Rock's at? How big's the team? How would you categorize yourself as a tech business?
Yeah, I think right now we might be around 18 people or so. So we're out of the early, MVP traction, trying to just get revenue. We have a formula that works. We have an effective money-making machine, so to speak, in terms of the way we can generate leads, the way we can service customers, the amount of churn we have or don't have, depends on what perspective you're looking at. But yeah, I mean, we're cash flow positive. We bootstrap this from a funding perspective, and and we continue to grow. And that's sort of where I was alluding to when you asked about 2022. The past few years, we've grown probably around 50% past 3 years or so, steadily, as we built the team, continued to improve the product and whatnot. But this year is definitely not going to be at 50%. It's not down, it's not low, but coming off that consistent type of growth, you start to look at everything and you start to go, hey, what's not working? But you also look at the economy, you look at all these other external forces, and you're like, hey,
Yeah.
when I go back and take that macro view, we're doing fine. We're still cash flow positive. We're still trying to bring on employees. We're still, selling to new customers every month. So.
Well, and I think sometimes, like, I think this is a classic founder trait, right? So I do it all the time. And it's not quite imposter syndrome, but I think sometimes we forget the perspective. So, like, yeah, like last year, the year before, you did 50-50 growth. This year, that say, I don't know what the number is, but say that you're going to do 25, 30%, whatever it is. And you're internally going, I wish that was another 50, because that's kind of what in my head I was going for. But actually 30% growth is still pretty decent. Like, I think that's the bit that sometimes as business owners or founders we forget. But it's so. And what is your role in the business now? I presumably that your role has changed as the business has grown, but what is your role now? Like, what do you do on a day-to-day?
Yeah, definitely. I would say I'm in the stage where I am still like an individual contributor on certain things, but I am less out of the day-to-day. So I still kind of play a glue role where, we have a product manager that was a big hire for me about a year ago, which has been phenomenal. And I could probably track back in time the big roles that we brought in that just were life-changing for me. So that was the last one. And the one before that was probably like I would say like a tech lead, some different things like that. So from the technology stack front. But yeah, mostly I probably review on a week-to-week basis, just where can I best help the team? So sometimes if there's like a team member down on something, I might jump into support tickets. If that team needs rebuilding, or I might be the recruiter, the hiring person. I usually hold a couple things. There's going to be things like working on pricing that are always going to probably be with me for a much longer time, but I still enjoy all the dirty work, so to speak, but trying to essentially help my teams as much as possible.
And like, where did the role for, where did the idea for Referral Rock come from? Like, what was the startup process? How did you get from idea to product?
Sure. Yeah, the idea was pretty simple. So this was back in, I'd say, 2013 or so. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'll just tell you where my mindset was at this point. It was, you mentioned Ubernote. I had a Web 2.0 startup that essentially didn't make it out of the recession. We don't have to go into grave details of that one. There's stuff on my Twitter profile if you're interested in learning more about that. But essentially, that was the first one that helped kind of focus me more on SaaS and how I could build a company. So I was in a stage where that one was kind of done, and I was doing some software consulting, and just I felt like I had that was when I had my first child. So all these other things, earlier married and all these other things going on. So consulting had a pretty flexible lifestyle. And then I was at a car dealership and getting some service work to my wife's car. And I'm sitting there with my coffee and my laptop, and a person walks in. You're just kind of like people watching a little bit. And someone walks in and they talk to a salesperson. They're like, hey, yeah, my friend, referred me over here and said you could help me. I wanted to buy like a new Accord. This is like a Honda dealership. So, and I just watching, and I see the salesperson, and his eyes just glaze over, and he's like, you could see he had no idea who the person was referring to, who they were talking to. But then within a flash and pan, they kind of locked into sales mode. Like, oh yeah, so and so. Like, I was like, yeah, he doesn't remember. But you just watch the transaction go on, and it just got me thinking. I'm like, okay, like, so like a word of mouth referral just happened there. I just saw it, but like, okay, how do people do this? How does that get tracked? Like, what happens now? Type of thing. And so that just, kind of piqued my interest. And already I knew peripherally about Dropbox's referral program at that time. All these other, PayPal's early one of like giving $10 to friends. And it just all these viral stories of referral programs. So people knew what those things were. And, while I'm sitting on my laptop, do a quick Google search, and I'm like, okay, like referral program for a car dealership, like came up with nothing. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. What about, and I started my brain going, oh, what other types of local services? So my whole early mindset was, who's doing it for these local services? Quick Google searches brought up like nothing. Anything in e-commerce was easy to find, even in that day. So essentially, that's where that first kind of positioning, as much as I was refined to not just go up against other well-established companies at that point in time, I'm like, no one's doing this. So in my mind, this was green pasture. This was something that could be a need, and thus born our first kind of positioning line, which was like referral software, not for just not for e-commerce or something along those lines.
And okay, so you've got the idea, you've kind of clarified your thoughts. How do you then start testing that, validating it, turning it into an actual thing, not just an idea?
Yeah. So the first thing was I needed to talk to customers. So I learned that early on from previous Uber Notes, the build it, they will come. I'm just going to sit in a corner and build this thing for 6 months and then present it to the world and see if anyone likes it. So I knew that wasn't a good idea anymore. So, but what I did was I made a list of like basically any kind of business, small business I knew. So it was my tax accountant, my mortgage broker, like any friends and family I knew. I basically sent out the friends and family email list of saying, hey, who has a business? I think you guys certain ones do, or if you know someone, send them to a Wufoo form and just like, asking them some questions. So sent that out to maybe the, I don't know, 200, 300 people I might have like had an email address of in my personal life, and just went and started just kind of doing some, quote unquote customer research on it, asking them questions, seeing if they thought this was a good idea, made all the errors that everyone makes. Like, hey, do you think this is a good idea? That type of stuff. So
leading them through to the answer that you want them to have.
Yeah. And fortunately for me, I didn't really listen, because most of them told me it was I don't think this is a good idea. I wouldn't do this. So as much as I started on the right foot by like asking people ahead of time, I still was like, I don't know. I still think there's something there. So I didn't really listen. And I can't say like I did the correct customer interview process either, but I did end up building a very lightweight prototype. I actually used some old software that I had that wasn't terrible, and that already had like a HTML template and some other things. And I just kind of like rigged it up very simplistically to take just some fields and just create pages manually for people. So it was sort of automated. It wasn't like I was handcrafting each page, but I had like a template, and I basically cut and pasted what was like a CSV, output out of a survey software or an Excel, and just was like, all right, now I'm just spinning up these 10 sites based off of this very rudimentary information. So I kind of got basically a beta going pretty quickly just to see how that would go. And this was all within the first year, and I was working on it like nights and weekends. I think this was 2014 through 2015.
So with Ubernote, right, you've taken that field of dreams approach, like if you build it, they will come, which is like, from my perspective, outside looking in, is a classic software developer approach. Like you go in, you're like, I'm going to build this feature, I want to do this, because I think there's an element of you're trying to solve the puzzle, and that's where a lot of like the passion and energy is coming from. With Referral Rock, you've gone kind of like tried to qualify the idea with kind of speaking to potential customers, and then you've started to bootstrap it out. How do you avoid falling into that feature overload trap, and just make it about qualifying that concept first? So like, I think like for me, where I've seen a lot of startups come up, that's where a lot of them start to trip themselves up.
So what do you mean by that feature over, like where they just want to keep building and keep adding features without looking at feedback and validation?
So keep building features, keep adding things to product before focusing on, have we actually got market fit? Do the customers really want this? And just like, so building, how do you make sure you're building for the better way to say it, how do you make sure you're building for the customer rather than building for what you want to build?
Right. That's tough. I mean, aside from the 7-year Ubernote journey that burned some of those things into me, I mean, I think a big part of it is probably, I would say the best way to do this is, without actually getting the reps yourself, is trying to find people that are talking about it. I think the build in public movement now on Twitter and stuff like that is really good, but at the same time, you gotta realize they're only sharing what they want to share. Some people are very, like, they're sharing everyday struggles, and that might be a little too much at times to just like watch the feed of those types of things. But and other people are just sharing the highlights, which is good too. You know, it's an inspirational way to kind of get about that. But I think what people end up doing is they see the end and they don't know how far in between. So if you're what I try to now tell people is, like, you got to focus on and trust what you see in front of you. Like, you really need to take more of a bottoms up approach and a brick by brick approach. It also doesn't mean that, okay, if this brick isn't going to work right here, it doesn't work for anybody. And that means like the whole market isn't there. You also realize you're in this smaller area. You're like, here, you're building the bricks. The timing might not be right. You might not have the right people that are seeing it. So like the sample size is going to matter as well, because you still need to talk to, probably 100 people before you go like, yeah, maybe that's not, or am I talking to the 100 right people? I don't know. Are these just the people I can easily access? So focusing into like that bottoms up approach, I think has really helped. I view a lot of arguments out there. You see it even in marketing, is like a top down approach and this brand, like, hey, I want to be the big brand awareness, or do I want to be in that consideration phase, all these other things. And for the early people, like getting in and starting from that bottoms up approach, I think is a better way to trust and see. They want to do the code, but at the same time, don't get like caught up into, hey, I'm just trying to be X, and I see that all the TechCrunch, Y Combinator stuff, the way it's written, that's just the story that is presented for the audience. Like, there's a lot of details in between. So
you did an accelerator with Ubernote, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what was that experience like?
I liked it a lot. I mean, it was definitely it helped shift in it trained me in a different way of thinking about the startup, because at that time it was just, we were building it, we were releasing it, we were getting users, and this was definitely more of a raise money kind of thing. It was the way that style was then. It was like a whole, a boot camp for type of thing for, I don't know, it lasted probably 6 to 10 weeks, and it was in person. And this is all in 2009. And we had a cohort of there were maybe 10 or 12 companies in there. And essentially it was grooming us to be ready for a demo day. So regardless of whatever successes we had, what products we built, everyone kind of came in different stages, but for the most part, people had some semblance of a product. They needed to work on, how are you going to pitch? How are you going to present? How do you get the next meeting with a VC? How do you work? And part of that process was also getting us right to be fundable. So it was like, reincorporating, doing it with saving an employee stock option pool, all these things that were honestly just a class in how VCs and how the funding world thinks. So structuring in that way. So I got a lot of lessons out of that. And I mean, the biggest one was when it came time for our demo day, this was, the economy was kind of in the crapper. So
life is about timing. But so one of the things I took from one of the podcasts I was listening to on the flight back was, you talked about, so when you originally launched it, you went very much down like a freemium model, and then kind of I think the words you used on the podcast were like, you got stuck in that freemium space, because then you tried to then bring people across, and it wouldn't quite work. My headphones just died then.
It's all right. No worries.
So yeah. So how did you get stuck in that? What was the challenge that you then faced from going from freemium through to actually trying to get revenue through?
I mean, I think the biggest part of being stuck there was the whole top-down thinking. Again, that's similar to like, you see what people are doing. So it's always just like, we kept punting and delaying the monetization and thinking about how it was actually going to get money. And it was sort of the model that everyone was doing with Facebook and all these other things. You're like, okay, don't worry about revenue. Just, like, capture users, capture all this, like get attention, like basically, get a piece of people's mind share and it still probably is the right thing for consumer based stuff, these mass things. But what we were building, obviously for other reasons, was not necessarily like, there was no real network effects. We thought there were. We could have called them network effects. We're like, oh, you could share notes, but that really wasn't a true network effect. And I think we just got caught up in that for way too long, just thinking that was the only way. Like in the beginning of it, we didn't even think of a revenue model. It was because you would read and see Delicious got bought for $10 million, like all these Flickr, all these things. And that was when we started it, because it was like, oh, we could just build a consumer app and it gets bought, or like, didn't even think of how it would get bought, the money, any way of surviving outside of that. So, young and stupid and internet age of like gold rush type of thing, that was the mentality. And not until the economy went into crapper and this is the, I don't know, what was that? What was the cause? That was the housing recession, 2008, 2009 time period where everything
the banking.
Yep, the banking stuff. So that's where just it all dried up, and it was like, oh, and with also poor timing, we were, honestly kind of burnt, right? Like we were already working on that since 2005. So we were already 4 or 5 years in, had already pulled the trigger on going full time, leaving our jobs, living off of savings, had some funding from the accelerator. So, we burned our candle too early. We weren't at the right phase. And by the time we tried the Hail Mary of trying to monetize and charge for it, it was, too little too late. That was never really built into the model, because it was like, oh, let me just, hey, you guys willing to pay for this? Hey, there's this fancy feature everyone keeps requesting. You want to, pay annually for that, right? So it wasn't really well thought out. It was kind of a Hail Mary at the end.
So you put a lot of time, effort. There's all this stuff that's gone into it. You did the accelerator, things like that. How do you make that final decision of pulling the plug? Like, how does that happen? Like, because that must have been kind of nerve-wracking and kind of maybe relieving, but like, how do you get to that point where you actually make that decision to kill it off?
I don't think we made a conscious one until we were really just done. So it honestly, it just kind of slowly faded away. It became somewhat of a zombie startup. It still existed. The thing was, it was, how much did it cost to run the servers? Not particularly much. We were engineers and loved to build it. So it was like, running it on as little as possible types of stuff, but still relatively performant. So that's the thing, is like, there was not a clear, like, hey, we ran out of money because we were doing it nights and weekends. It did scale down to just me and the key other co-founder. We did have a couple other friends helping us, but it was easy for them to see, like, oh, we're like, hey, yeah, you don't really need to work on it as much. And I think, I don't even remember a watershed moment, or like, hey, on this day we're stopping. It was just kind of like, oh, yeah, maybe you should like look for another job too. So it was sort of, everyone kind of just faded away. At least that's what my memory tells me. There was no like sit down, hey, we're shutting down the company, because there were no real employees and all these other things, and just running it wasn't gonna really cost anything. So I think it was always the idea, again, just maybe we'll get another article, maybe like this one new feature will turn, maybe it's just that one other thing. Because we were still like slow burning, doing a little bit here on there, because we still use the product ourselves. So half the time it was like, ooh, I'd love to have this feature, let me build that. So but that was, yeah, a few years of just without even realizing how much of a toll it was taking, like what it was doing to my creative energy, because I wasn't even thinking about other startup ideas. It was just very and again, I was distracted with, newly married, starting a family, all of those types of things. So it's just sort of in the back as like taking up maybe like a 20% of your brain load.
So coming back to Referral Rock, so you've got an idea, you've started to test it out. When did you decide to make that first employee? So like, when did you go out and actually find a team member? What was the tipping point for that?
The tipping point for that was just for me, was just knowing there were more things I could be doing that were productive, that could move the business forward, that I didn't have to personally do. So like my model for me, and I'm a like solo founder of Referral Rock, but not discredit. There's a lot of people that help me, and there's a lot of, and I have what is almost like a late co-founder that kind of joined on a couple years in. Like at that point, it already had revenue, already had a product. I already essentially had like the template of inbound marketing, SEO, talking to customers, selling them, and having them use the product. So I got the basic scaffolding that still is kind of more or less our formula today. But until I got to the point where I'm like, I'm taking all this time on sales calls. Right now, I got to the point where once I started taking calls, it was like, oh, now I have to go schedule myself. So half my time is taking calls for demos and things like that. And the other half I'm like coding. So I kind of did either a flip flop on days, or a morning I'm coding and the afternoon I'm taking calls, and vice versa on the other day. So at least got like a full run and had my schedule open for people all over in different places. And that was the point where I'm like, okay, I think I could teach someone else to do the selling, because right now I'm the only one that can do the coding, and that's fine. So that was like the first hire. So that was the first place where I'm like, I think I can hire someone to replicate what I'm doing here. So that was the first spot.
Well, so you've managed to segue beautifully into my next question, which is like, where did you decide to, so you went sales first in terms of like that hire. And my question was going to be, where do you spend your money on growth? Like when you first start out, do you go sales or marketing? And then what's your go-to-market plan for Referral Rock? Because like quite often that's a quandary that businesses will go through. Like, do we build a market, or do we actually get somebody just hitting the phones? So you went phones first. Is that because you were doing marketing alongside that, or like how's that panned out?
Yeah. So at that point I was doing enough marketing with SEO and enough content marketing that was bringing enough leads. And at that point, it's hard to say exactly what all the pieces were that added up to it. But, there was a lot of spaghetti on the wall type of thing. Whether it's, putting yourself out on, listing sites, whether it was like, I think we were in, got some broadcasts from Beta List. This was all, I think, pre-Product Hunt as well. So it was what Product Hunt is today that people do now, but in different formats, different sites, that type of thing. So I had enough early marketing and enough early traction. And again, we were building it to be really honestly more of like what is today like the indie hacker kind of dream of like a solo founder doing all the things and maybe having some people to help them with support. So that was the initial thing. And so it was a self-service product when we started, and it still is not as much as I would hope it to be, but we all aspire for more. But that was the way it was drawn up. And when people would, through my marketing or through content and things like that, I get enough people that would come on the site and sign up for a trial and start that way. And then what led me into doing inbound sales or the inbound sales was because essentially I'd get annoyed like working with them on chat. And I'd be like, let me just show you, or I'd be, it's just like, this is so infuriating. Both trying to type at the same time, different messages going back and forth. Let me just like, do you want to just hop on a video call? I don't think it was even Zoom was there yet. I was like, do you want to hop on? I don't know what we were using, but it was like, you want to hop on that?
Or WebEx.
Go to meeting or WebEx. Yeah. And so I would do that. And I started making a lot more sales, probably like 5x the amount of otherwise just letting people kick around and answering chat support. So for us, it was more of like, we had that formula. So it wasn't as much a decision on like where to invest. It was basically me just backfilling what I know was working. So I was already like kind of the Marine hitting the like had all the things. I just couldn't scale out in all the ways I needed to. So it's like, well, what can help me over here? So the decision for that was more of like, we had enough leads coming in. So it wasn't people getting on the phones to make outbound calls. It was all inbound. And we still are today. We don't do any outbound aside from like reaching out to leads that have talked to us, 6 months later or that type of thing. I'd still consider that mostly inbound.
So like how big is your like sales and marketing growth team, however you position it?
Yes.
How many people?
Yeah. Right now, I think there are 3 full-time salespeople that take inbound demo requests. They also look at the trials and look at other signups and things like that. And there's 3 individual contributor salespeople there. We have, I think, 2 content marketers on the team, and actually the person that kind of leads that team right now, he leads both of those teams. So in terms of just working with content initiatives in addition to kind of managing the sales team.
So, and again, another beautiful segue there. Thanks. So we've been connected for like quite a while, and like I've always reading your posts and stuff on LinkedIn, and you're very kind of open and like honest with like where you're up with the business to a point. I guess there's stuff you probably do and don't share, but
Sure.
then on LinkedIn as well, you talk very much about the people within the business and like the importance of people. That's not, I would say, not normal. It's going to sound disrespectful to all the other founders, but it's not the normal first thing that somebody says when they're talking about their business. They're normally talking about burn rates, like churn rates, like that kind of stuff. So why the focus on people?
I don't know. I think that's the stuff I feel like I'm learning the most about, and the ones that really are making it go. I mean, I've always viewed a lot of this as not about me. I mean, I might have started the things, I might have like figured out the code or the secret keys or these the go to market, the product ideas and things like that. But I couldn't do this alone. And I think too many times you have people that are just really spouting off about their numbers, spouting off about other things like that, and I don't know what that actually does other than maybe feed their ego. So for me, it's not about me. It is about the people that are helping me do this. And honestly, like, even I also know from at least I think enough from a marketing perspective, like that's not going to help anyone either. Like if I'm going up, like spooling off about our referral marketing numbers and basically trying to make a brand play where honestly, like, it's not. And talking to I want to help other startup founders because I know the struggles that there are, and just I think continuing to shed light on those side of things, because it makes sense across the board, whether you're a VC or bootstrapped or whatever. At a certain point, everyone has to run a business in a certain way, and I feel like the faster either a bootstrapper learns some of the things on the upside, like, yeah, maybe I should take more bets and spend a little more money and things like that. But I also have to have a solid base of what works, so I'm not like betting the farm. And on the VC side, hey, at some point, I have to stop just making 50 bets, and I actually have to get down to grassroots and find something that's working. You just have 2 camps coming in. But I feel like I'm like always in that middling area, definitely probably a little more tilted towards this bootstrap self-funding type of piece. But so I'm definitely in this weird spot where I feel like more of this stuff is really the real stuff, but I don't care about the audience with it. So it's not the people like you or the people that resonates with, they're going to find me, and they're going to find those, and hopefully it helps them. Because for me, that piece of it is not about like marketing, or it's not about, about me, and me having a voice. It's more about what I can do through my own stories and lessons and whatever, and share those. And maybe it's saving someone from 7 years of Uber note pain, and maybe they can do it in 2.
So when you speak to other founders, and like you're in the space, you're in the tech startup scene, what's like one of the most common challenges, or like so I used to have a mentor, and his first question before every session was like, what is it that's keeping you up at night? Like, so from what you've experienced and from what you see and hear, what is that one thing that is keeping up most tech founders at the moment?
It probably runs across the gambit. I think there's the ones that are definitely, it depends on who you're talking to. I said the most ones I'll end up talking to probably are the ones that are in an earlier stage. And I think the biggest one, again, is probably one you brought up, is like, should I be doing more marketing, or should I be, working more on features and product? And for me, it goes into just, there's really 2 main things. So I just keep basically trying to and everyone does this too, but I think this is the advice from those early people is like, figure out some distribution strategy, figure out how to get, like, you need to have that consistently. Because if I look back at all the mistakes we've made over the past years of Referral Rock, the redeeming thing that has always kept the lights on is that SEO and that inbound. It might be a different strategy for different people. Maybe it's outbound that works, or maybe it's some brand stuff, maybe it's some other things, but having that distribution like channel locked down in a consistent way, and also making sure you don't drift and get too fancy and like leave the things that were working because you're just like, oh, this is all working, but and drift too far from your core. Just keep nailing that, and if you don't have a focus on the marketing and distribution side, like, you either need to find a co-founder that does, maybe it's an agency, or another way to just really keep your head there. Because it's like, those are the things. It's like you have your product and service and that distribution. And I like saying distribution more than sales and marketing, because people hear one term and they think of it, but distribution is where I try to hold my hat to. If you have those things, it's like you figure out if that equation can equal some sort of positive money, then that fuels whatever you want to do and experiments you want to make. So most people don't look at that. They're always looking at product first and trying to, again, do the whole like product hunt launch and all these things, and aren't focused on a consistent distribution strategy.
So Nicole's asked a question on LinkedIn. So she said, do you feel like as a business, you are ready to use your product? And to give that some context, you're saying, or are you still too early as a brand to be able to build a referral program? So I think what she's getting at the crux of that question sounds like she's saying, like, is there a stage where companies should start thinking about this? Is there a too early? Is there like a perfect time when somebody should be doing this?
I would say like a perfect time. It's definitely later than most people think. There definitely can be like little spot ones people will do for promotions and things like that. Honestly, the way our software is built, it's really meant to be having like a long running referral program that is your kind of standard one. That's like, here's your standard offering that every customer types gets. So it is definitely for a later stage company that has either a consistent funnel of distribution, whether it's customers coming in and are consistently getting, positive reviews, positive remarks from their customers. They're already getting word of mouth. They're just not tracking it. The salespeople hear about it, those types of things. To answer her other part of the question, that's actually a really interesting one, because it bothered me for many years in the early stages that like, we just never could run. We would pay less attention to running our own program. And it was always one of these questions. You go, hey, well, where's your program? And it's like, well, we're actually not the right fit for us yet. So at those early parts, so it definitely picks on something that is, everyone wants to dog food. And it took me a good bit of time to just realize, like, I'm not my target audience. I'm probably getting more to it now. We definitely are. But in those early parts, it was challenging kind of doing that. That's also another founder like trip up thing, is that dog fooding for too long, or it's good to get started and have that initial vision and idea. And that's, you have to have a plan and a picture of what that looks like. You got to put that out there, and then you got to actually see where it lands in the world and what else, and understand if you're in that small segment of a niche person that really doesn't look at the world that same way, and kind of rejig and filter to see you can align your product to a wider audience, but obviously not too wide to where you're not really talking to anyone. So getting over that hump for early founders because everyone's like, oh, dog food, I dog fooded, and I'm the product expert. It's building it for me. But that light switch of knowing that we weren't really building for ourselves definitely helped us from a product standpoint, and just even from our own syndrome of not running our own program and having a good answer when a customer would be like, well, where's your program?
And I think, and one of the other things that struck a chord with me on the podcast I was listening to this morning was, I forget who said it, but you were talking about when you get 10 stranger money. So like people you don't know who you don't have existing, so that there's not almost like a guilt or a sense of obligation that they have to be buying this product from you, where you start
Yep.
to actually get externals from your agreements to start buying your products. So that feels like almost like a validation point.
Yeah.
You at the beginning have validated your business, or tried to, when you did like the interviews, and then you were like, fuck it, I'm going to ignore them anyway, but which is a good thing. But you've then you've got those different kind of milestones validations. Do you go back to your customers to validate and recheck, or like, do you just kind of look at churn rates to give you that kind of information now?
No, we have a lot of metrics and a lot of so since we've started, like I mentioned, we didn't go too in depth about the other structure side of the business, but we have a customer success team and did that from a pretty early time in terms of onboarding. That kind of just really dovetailed nicely into having the inside sales team as having a customer success team. So we were always tracking things on their usability, their health. We had a metric for days to launch, in addition to how many referrals were they getting versus expected. So kind of knowing that were some very good indicators, other than just looking at the front end of like, did they buy, and the tail end of did they leave, type of thing. So we've always kind of looked at those, and I would say in the past year we've really revamped that. We really redid our kind of product event metrics and things like that. We've invested into a customer success software to really look at health scores in a more and understand those different segments. And we always had we had a very qualitative assessment of it, because we always put people on it, and that was a big part of what got us here. So we always had a good beat, but we also ended up with a lot of our own like recency biases or personal biases as well. So that comes with that. And, the past year, really digging more into the data and having that is getting us much more well-rounded. I wouldn't say we're done and we're in a perfect place with that, but we've got a lot of great frameworks and pieces in place that are giving us that data. So
Dave has asked a question. When did you get to the moment of, yes, it's working? So like, when did you go, actually, my idea's got legs, or like, I have built a business here that has longevity? Like, what was that moment for you?
Actually, what's funny enough, this leads back to your other comment about the stranger money and whatnot. And I think that was a big part of it. So there was probably so it was like the first year there was the beta, then a friend challenged me to start charging for it, and within probably 6 months, it was making I don't know, $5,000 to $8,000 a month, and it's still, you felt like some imposter syndrome or some elements of like, this could stop any day. Are they sure? It's like, and then I read a great Jason Lemkin SaaSter blog post that I think it's still out there, and I've referenced it commonly, which is like, it's something along the lines, if you have 10 unaffiliated customers, like, you've got something. So that was definitely a point in time of like, okay, yeah, I have way more than 10, and I'm able to do this consistently. And it's just this, for in the beginning, when it's starting to happen, you're like, ooh, is this really happening? And just as quickly, this could end. But I think there's two pieces. Is once you, again, we talked about it earlier, stepping back and taking that macro level, other than looking at what's happening day to day. Ooh, 3 people churned. Oh my gosh, the sky's falling. This is the end, right? And then going back and taking back, okay, but you realize you've gotten, last week we had 10 new customers. So like, the sky isn't falling. So I think having the reps and being in there longer, it probably took me about 2 years of revenue to really feel like, okay, this isn't just a flash in the pan. And but seeing those reps, I think, definitely helps, right? Seeing those reps of it consistently happening, and just getting your own, almost like that's that recency bias on the other side. It's like actually helping you. You're like, okay, if I spin this out at least the past 6 months or years, like, okay, this is working, right? And then we are seeing customers getting positive ROI. We're getting a lot of reviews. We're getting customers that are staying, and not just staying because they left their credit card on, but staying because they're getting value out of the software. And even if it's not 100%, you're never really going to have that. People churn for different reasons. A champion leaves, or they never actually launch. And there's things you can control, and there's things you can't, right? But knowing and understanding like that health. Because at the beginning, you're like, only 50% are actually like what I would consider getting value. It's like, well, it may mean something else to them. And making sure you're having those conversations and again, seeing those reps. So it probably took about 2 years, and some of those little mind tricks in there about the unaffiliated customers and the stranger money, and seeing all these and seeing the customers actually get referrals and run business and continue to use the software day in and day out. And then you go, okay, yeah, maybe I am onto something.
So back in 2010, 2011, I was part of a tech startup as well. So I played in the space for a little bit, and we did a mini accelerator thing, and we did some investor training, like similar stuff, how to pitch, how to position. And one of the things that stuck with me when I went through that process is they were saying one of the key things they're often looking for is founders with experience, like this, not their first startup. And failures or kind of like things that just didn't work has also, like, it's a tick in the box because you learn a lot from that. So your experience with Uber Notes, do you think that helps or hinders with your imposter syndrome? Like, I'm not saying you've got imposter syndrome, but that kind of imposter syndrome thoughts, do you think that it adds to it or detracts from it?
I definitely think I don't think it hurt me. I think it definitely helped me, that having those experiences, if anything, hardened me on certain things, which was like, I want to sell to businesses. And it's, whether that was the right decision at that time or not, I mean, it proves to have been, B2B is not a bad place to be. But, I mean, Uber was honestly selling to consumers. I mean, it was at a day and age of trying to like people paying for stuff in an app store was not as much of a thing yet, right? Or that the willingness to pay for just little onesie twosie fitness apps and things like that was not there. So we were up against a big even just cultural mind shift. But at that point in time, it hardened me to be like, nope, just selling to business. If any idea comes across me that is related to selling to consumers, nope, don't do that. So it did give me a very strong like point of view, and also like, businesses have value, businesses have money, businesses are going to, if they're going to get benefits out of it, you're part of, hopefully, like a part of their operational processes, whether it's sales, marketing, or internal stuff. Like, if you provide value to them, like, that's a much more sustainable place to be. And it's also proven well during the pandemic stuff and the economy, because it's, as much as you'll read, most of the economy stuff is focused on consumers, and it does trickle down to businesses. But, that focus has also led for like a much smoother operating cadence versus like, what you can see in consumer markets.
So my favorite question from when I do these each week is, what's your biggest career fuck up so far? So the one that you've learned the most from.
Ooh.
Everyone always does a sharp intake of breath.
I would probably say the biggest ones were, and recently I would even just say, like, with Referral Rock, there were some, we talked a lot about the formula, like the basic pieces that were really made it successful, like I said, hey, this distribution channel or these other things. There's definitely things in there that I would say, once you have something working, like making sure you keep that like pegged to the wall and you keep doing that thing. Don't get distracted by the shiny other things. Maybe you are, but don't leave your base. Like, keep your base and keep investing in it and keep doubling down on those. I've seen it from other teams that, companies bigger than ours that got away from something that was really working, and they just, whether it was like, it just started to seem boring because you're looking at a dashboard and it's the same thing. And it's just like, same thing for a CEO saying the same things over and over again. Honestly, some of those boring things that are working, like, don't just drop off of them because they seem boring, or you're just going to assume they're always going to work. Like, still, you have to keep a watchful eye on those things. And I'll say that my biggest mistakes have been like where I was much better focused on certain numbers and metrics in the business. And I deviated from them and kind of tried something new because I thought, like, I had a different idea and I wanted to go focus something else. And we stopped looking at those numbers. And those would have been bigger warning signs over troubles that ran into, thereafter, so to speak. So that's the resounding thing. It's understand what's working and keep doing it and keep watching it, like keep feedback loops to make sure you're doing that. And if you can invest in those, keep doubling up.
So my drivers within business is like the excitement, the new, what are the opportunities, looking at those things. They're the things that I really enjoy.
Yeah, definitely.
And I had to bring in processes and people to make sure that we didn't just follow my mentality through the business. So we had to have people who are actually focused, and also people in the business who are able to challenge me and say, no, let's not do that. And that was a massive turning point for us as an agency as well. So what's a question for Patrick, and then one last one from me. What's new and what's next for you in 2022, 2023?
Let's see. The thing I keep wanting to get to is I actually want to work on a no, definitely not. is actually turning up a little bit more on our brand side, because I don't think we have a brand. Like, we are definitely in the consideration phase when people are looking for software. Some people might know me from doing things like this, but it's really just founders. And like we talked about, stage of the business, oftentimes referral programs are not good for startups, like at those earlier stages anyway. So from a brand perspective, I've continued to want to do I'm kind of working on a podcast with another marketing person that we're interested in launching. We're kind of testing it out and tinkering with that. And to go along with that, I do want to do more on the brand front with Referral Rock. So as much as like, hey, once we've locked down and keep focused on this consideration phase area, but again, like, the best referral programs are ones run by bigger brands and that have more of a consistent resonance with their customers and things like that, or just people that are following them. And I do want to do kind of a project on sort of a build in public, but for brand. So I want to be like, hey, I want to do this, month-to-month update on how we're building a brand and things like that from a B2B perspective. So that's been a pet project. I have tons of notes that I just have to finish some other things and free myself up to start those. That's my next shiny passion project type of thing, but that does allude into this and gets me more experience on marketing and brand building outside of just the stuff that works today. So
I think like a great kind of stereo, and I'm not just saying this because we're a Drift partner, but I think what they were doing in 2016, 17, 18 with their brand side, so focusing heavily on the Seeking Wisdom podcast with DC and B, and then hypergrowth events, and kind of very brand heavy in those early stages, but also building in public, talking about what they were doing. So yeah, like, I'd be into it. Do it. Be fun. Hey, last question for me. Who should I interview next?
I think, have you met Pete Caputa?
Yep.
The CEO of DataBox. I think he's great. Just I think I reached out to him a couple years ago, met him in person a few times. I think I bought him a steak dinner once at one of the inbounds. He's the type of person that, if you like kind of my approach, he's definitely a similar pragmatic, thinker and team builder and a people person. Like, yeah, he's probably one of my favorite other CEOs to talk to on just, and we bounce ideas off each other every few months or so. We've kept in contact, and I think he'd be a great person for, if you jive with me, you'd probably jive with him here too. So.
Are you going to come to Inbound this year?
Not sure. I think it's early October, right? Is that the September. No. I mean, early September. My biggest challenge with that, on the time it is there's a handball tournament I go to every year over Labor Day. And if I went away from the family for already, that's going to be like a 5-day away. And then if it's the next week that I'm like, okay, off to Boston. So I'd like to, and I think in past years it hasn't been so close to Labor Day. So that's the question mark. Our family is just getting used to getting back and being out and away and different things. So we'll see. It's also school year starts. There's a lot of stress in the family household. So that's probably If I had to choose one, I'm still going to choose the handball tournament because I might have
Well,
to defend
hopefully I
a
see you there.
national title.
Hopefully I see you there, and if I don't, now that conference season and everything is open again, I'm sure I'll see you at something in person soon. Josh,
Yeah,
thanks for being up for doing 6 sessions. Really insightful
Awesome.
and a lot of fun. If
All right.
anybody wants to follow up with you, where should they connect?
I am JLogic, JLOGIC on Twitter. Probably not as active on LinkedIn, but I probably should be. And like I mentioned, the Searching for SaaS podcast, or, if you are later on and want to do more with your word of mouth and have a referral program, come check out Referral Rock. So
perfect. Josh, thank you very much. And thanks for joining us, everybody.
All right. Thanks.